Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Asian stocks hit a new record, extending a global rally, buoyed by strong Wall Street earnings and hopes of a US-China trade deal. Australian rare earth stocks surge on the back of a critical minerals deal with the US. Plus, history made. Japan votes for Sanae Takaichi to be its first ever female Prime Minister. Good morning, happy Tuesday. So certainly Japanese equities and assets are in focus. We'll get that story for you shortly. On that vote, the first female PM for Japan. In terms of the equity market story then, risk on across these markets. The US and Wall Street ending with gains yesterday. The S&P 500, its best two-day rally since June, with gains of more than 1% by the close. European stocks were also higher by the end of Monday by a little over 1%, with tech and defence stocks leading the gains. And today, European futures looking to add to that, just by 0.1%, but given the rally yesterday, not insignificant. FTSE 100 futures looking to add 22 points, up 0.2%. Maybe a bit of a breather when it comes to the S&P E-minis then, after that 1% gain yesterday. Currently flat, looking for the next catalyst. Certainly, the earnings story is one of the factors that has propelled the gains. Nasdaq 100 futures currently pointing lower just by 4 points. Let's flip the board and have a look cross-asset, because there was also a rally when it comes to US Treasuries. The 10-year back below 4% at 397, relatively stable in the session today. But again, through that key line of 4%. Euro-dollar at 116, a little softer on the single currency by 0.1%. Brent and oil prices continue to be under pressure. We have some details around just how much of a surplus is on the market right now. $60 a barrel, just below 61, down 0.2% on Brent. And spot gold currently at 4,341, close to fresh record highs, but a little softer in today's session, down 0.3%. Let's cross over to Asia right now, bringing Winnie Su in Hong Kong for a focus on what is happening in terms of the Japanese market reaction to the stamping now, in terms of the announcement that the parliament in Japan has voted for Sanae Takaichi to be the first female Prime Minister of Japan. Winnie.
Morning, Tom. Obviously, Japan is really in the focus right now, but just take a look at what's going on overall in the Asian market. Another positive day, and we're extending gains from yesterday, especially on the back of that U.S.-China tensions easing, and also, like you mentioned, some optimism when it comes to U.S. earnings. So we're seeing major gauges here up with Korea, Taiwan. They're both headed for a record close, and also Chinese stocks also extending gains here on the back of that positive tone when it comes to U.S.-China tensions, and also as the fourth plan still underway. Now, actually, Australian stocks are in the spotlight today as well, because U.S. President Trump actually just signed that deal with Australian Prime Minister to boost the U.S.'s access when it comes to the critical minerals. And that is really lifting miners and also rare earth stocks in Australia. We are seeing that the material sub-gauge is actually the top performer when it comes to Australian stocks. While investors say that it might not have a very big economic impact on Australia, it at least reinforces Australia's position when it comes to a global supply chain for rare earth. Now, let's go back to what's going on in Japan, because we just had that result out from the lower house saying that Sanae Takaichi basically won the vote, and that it effectively puts her in the position to become Japan's next prime minister, and also Japan's very first female prime minister. And it's really driving the Takaichi trade to go on with her pro-stimulus and also pro-tech, pro-defense, pro-cybersecurity trades. And that is also pressuring the yen here a little bit because of her pro-monetary easing stance. Now, we are going to be focusing on kind of that final vote from the upper house as well, but pretty much things are set. We are also waiting for her to choose who is going to be for her cabinet, and for now we're hearing that most likely she will pick Katayama to become the finance minister, which is also going to make her the very first female finance minister for Japan.
OK, Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Thank you very much indeed on the strength coming through for these Asian equities, with a focus, of course, on what is happening in Japan, and the weakness in the yen continues to hold on the back of that vote. Now to the US-China trade conversations, something also, of course, that is propelling the upside for global stocks. President Trump has reiterated his threat for a tariff hike on Chinese goods if there is not a trade deal by his November deadline. However, the US leader says he still plans to meet Xi Jinping at the end of this month and is expecting positive discussions between the two leaders.
I expect we'll probably work out a very fair deal with President Xi of China. So most of you will be with us. It's going to be very exciting. And I think we're going to work out something that's good for both countries.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Balash Pence in Hong Kong, who's been following this for us. Balash, then a note of optimism, it seems, from Donald Trump. He's kind of obviously changed his tone, hasn't he, in the last week or so? But he's sounding pretty optimistic about a potential US-China trade deal.
That's right, and that's how markets are taking this. It's a remarkable change in sentiment, a remarkable change in tone compared to the sort of very acrimonious comments from a couple of weeks ago when there was an escalation of rhetoric. The way we can understand it best perhaps right now is that this is a de-escalation, especially when taken together with Scott Bessent's call with Chinese Vice Premier He and their upcoming meeting in Malaysia, which will kind of pave the way to the leaders meeting at the end of the month. So that gives markets, that gives investors a way to understand that there might be a roadmap toward a potential agreement between China and the U.S. over trade, even though, as we heard from the U.S. president, very, very difficult issues still remain. He named rare earths, he named Taiwan, soybeans. These are very difficult issues to resolve. So there's a lot still to talk about before we get to an agreement. But right now, a positive sentiment prevails.
Yes, and to the complexity of some of those issues, one has to wonder whether the optimism in the markets is maybe slightly overdone, as President Trump talks about potentially a deal with China. How much progress could actually be made? What would count as a win when it comes to some of those key issues? I mean, he's mentioned, and you've mentioned there, Taiwan, for example.
Yeah, as far as markets are concerned right now, the fact that the two sides are still talking and not trading barbs and not ratcheting up measures and tariffs on each other, that counts as a win. We know what both sides want out of the deal. The U.S. wants greater access to Chinese rare earths. China wants greater access to U.S. technology and U.S. markets, and then we can go down the list of issues that they need to resolve. Until now, that they've been operating in this framework of trade truce. That has been extended from time to time, and then the periodic escalation of tariff threats. So I think for markets, even a sense of stability might be a win coming out of that very, very crucial, long-awaited meeting between the two presidents.
OK, Bloomberg's Balash Pence, thank you very much indeed with that update. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 had its best two-day gains since June, and certainly, as Balash was saying, it was the mood between the US and China that is a factor there, boosting as well by the strong earnings stories, the geopolitics, the trade conversation, and decent earnings. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel right now for a take on what has been powering the gains and whether or not, Val, you think this can be sustained.
Well, look, it could be all down to more earnings this week. Remember, we do hear from Mag 7. We also hear from Netflix and the likes of GM today. But really, in yesterday's session, it was a handful of factors that drove S&P futures to essentially make up the gap from that Friday slide from 2 Fridays ago, that original Trump tweet about 100% additional tariffs on China. We are now back to flat over the last 8 sessions. It was optimism in the regional banks that drove some of this. Tom Zion's Western Alliance, those that were of focus last week, have had a really strong 2-day rally, essentially climbing back all those losses from Thursday. And then it was the Mag 7. The Mag 7 made up around 50% of the equity market gains yesterday. A quarter of those gains were done by one single stock, and that is Apple. The shares really surging in trade yesterday, up nearly 4%. And this is all on the back of optimism around its new iPhones that had an upgrade from the street. But we've seen some general positivity around the demand, whereas before we were quite depressed about it. So Apple hitting setting its first record of 2025, Tom, doing it in style, up just shy of 4% and really dragging the NASDAQ with it. I also want to mention that just alongside of these momentum trades returning, you have tech, you have gold. It's also happening alongside a drop in implied volatility. Take a look at the VIX index. This is Wall Street's fear gauge, the index of implied volatility on the S&P 500. It has dropped 10 points in the last 2 days. It surged above 28. We're now sitting just above the 18 handle. So this drop in implied volatility is really leading the markets to feel risk on today.
Bloomberg's Sanae Takaichi, thank you very much indeed. Now, the world's largest cloud provider, Amazon Web Services, AWS, has resolved the issues that plagued its services for about 15 hours. The episode has highlighted how much of the internet is dependent on the operations of a single company. Down Detector tracked disruptions on hundreds of sites, including Zoom, McDonald's, Robinhood Markets and Apple. Let's bring in Bloomberg Tech Asia correspondent Annabelle Drulas for the details. Annabelle, just how bad was the outage then for AWS?
Yeah, it was really significant. I think you've outlined some of the companies that are affected there. I read reporting that there was more than 1,000, but you're talking about millions of customers as well. Just to sort of recap, people that we've spoken to say this was the biggest outage for AWS going back to 2021, so several years ago. And that was a point where we saw things like Disney amusement parks, Netflix issues, Adele concert issues. I mean, lots of things were affected at that time. But AWS made some changes to build more security and stability into the system. But as we said, on Monday, it seems like there was some problems. I mean, fairly mundane issues, it seems. We can get more details on what the causes were in just a moment. But as you said, just to recap some of the damage, services disrupted for around 15 hours, lots of companies affected. And as you said, I mean, this is a very, very significant company for the overall functioning of the global internet, because you're talking about a third of the global cloud market comes from AWS services. But we also did get the statement earlier this morning, about 6 hours ago, saying that AWS services, or the cloud, is back to operating normally after the outage.
Annabelle, do we know what was behind this? What caused this outage?
Yeah, so the company has put out a statement, or what we've heard from the company is that they say that a digital services directory for a key database service malfunctioned. So that meant that data that was reliant on that database was unable to retrieve information. Some of the other reporting on this has attributed it to a pretty common outage issue, which is known as a DNS error, or a domain name system error. So what that means in practice is a DNS server is like an internet address book. And so if there's an error, it means that your device, whether that's your phone or your computer or your tablet, can't connect to the website that you're trying to access. So that is being sort of attributed to the issue. In terms of ongoing issues from this, given that AWS says that this is now back to normal, the cloud operating is back to normal operations, we actually have had some reaction from our Bloomberg intelligence team, and they're saying that given you've seen a disruption of this magnitude, it actually could renew calls for backup cloud services for critical workloads, because the top three cloud providers together, so you're talking about AWS, Microsoft, and also Google, account for about 70% of the infrastructure as a service market, and they have done so. Well, that's going back to 2024 data, but still very significant, as you can see there in that chart. AWS, Microsoft, and Google for global infrastructure service providers.
Yeah, that dominance is significant, isn't it? So real question marks then about potential backups. On the back of this, thank you very much for the update. Bloomberg Asia tech correspondent breaking it down for us, Annabelle Drulas, on the outage at AWS and the consequences. Here's what else to think about today then. 7 a.m. UK time, we're going to get public finances details out of the UK as we lead up, of course, to that crucial budget for the Chancellor towards the end of November. And at 12 p.m, we will be hearing from the ECB's Christine Lagarde. She's going to be speaking. We'll be across those comments for you, of course. And on the earnings front, General Motors reporting at 11:30 a.m. UK time. Netflix and Texas Instruments also coming out later in the day. So earnings season continuing, ramping up to some extent, in fact, later today. And, of course, Tesla reporting the first of Mag 7 on Wednesday. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to Day-B-Go on the terminal. And in focus, you have the rally, of course, fresh record highs, beating their records over in Asia on some of the earnings momentum and on expectations of an optimistic outcome when it comes to US-China trade conversations. Coming up, Japan making history by appointing its first female Prime Minister. We get the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Japanese stocks rallying to new records as Sanae Takaichi is voted in as the nation's first female prime minister. Her appointment marks a watershed moment for Japan's male-dominated society. Bloomberg's John Herskowitz is in Tokyo with the details. John, a historic moment then for Japan. What is next for Takaichi as she is about to assume office? What challenges does she face?
Yeah, the challenges are enormous. The first the first thing that comes up today is the formation of a cabinet. We should get that later today. We'll get the lineup announced. And then there's trying to form a stable government. To make this deal to become prime minister, the ruling LDP, which Takaichi is the leader of, made a new alliance with Ishin, the Japan Innovation Party. This party is pressing for things like cutting off the sales tax for groceries for a couple of years, and it also wants to reduce the number of members of parliament. So trying to figure out how to work with this new coalition partner, form a stable government, is another challenge. And this coalition still is short of a majority in parliament, meaning that they're going to need the help of others. Then there's the international front. We have big summits coming up. We have ASEAN, we have APEC. President Trump is supposed to visit Japan this month, and there are worries about Takaichi's conservative credentials. She is seen as being on the hard right, which has caused some concern in South Korea. During the previous administrations in Japan, there's been close cooperation among South Korea, Japan, and the U.S., so she's going to have to try to address those concerns with going with South Korea. And the things that toppled the last government, that forced former Prime Minister Ishiba out, are still there. There's public discontent with the rising prices. There's concern about the way things are going. And the trade deal with the U.S. is causing some troubles with Japan's automotive industry, a key pillar of Japan's economy.
OK, so a lengthy list of challenges then for the incoming Prime Minister, but also her cabinet as well, John. And you mentioned this is going to be central to what happens in the next 24 hours or so as she starts to put that cabinet together. Who are some of the key names to be thinking about?
Sure, we've gotten some details released through Japanese media. For the finance minister, Japan is expected to get its first female finance minister in Satsuki Katayama. She's a former Ministry of Finance official. She looks like she will support expansionist policies with extra budgets, and this has helped rally in equities. One of her rivals for the prime minister's race, Koizumi, is expected to be defense minister. One interesting choice is Toshimitsu Motegi as foreign minister. He was previously a foreign minister. He did some trade negotiations when he had the job. He's known he has a reputation for being a bit confrontational, and he is going to be looking at the trade deals with the U.S. He speaks English quite well. We may see a bit more friction between Japan and the U.S. with Motegi as foreign minister. This will be an interesting one to see how it plays out with so much at stake with trade between Japan and the U.S.
OK, some of the key names that could be filling that cabinet then. Bloomberg's John Herskowitz in Tokyo. Thank you very much indeed with that update, John. Of course, out of the Japanese capital. Coming up, Europe rallies, meanwhile, support for Ukraine after a disappointing and fractious meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. Disappointing, of course, for Zelensky and Ukraine. Details later in the programme. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, the disruption caused by the outage at Amazon Web Services is a fresh reminder of the importance of cybersecurity. And the CEO of the software company, Okta, says The AI boom has brought with it new threats in that domain. Todd McKinnon spoke to Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn. Take a listen.
I think about the world as layered into different critical services. Cloud infrastructure is one critical service. And as the leading independent neutral identity company, we're building this identity service for the entire world, whether that's enterprises, whether that's consumers, whether that's people building AI agents. We want to be that identity infrastructure. It's important for cybersecurity, it's important for business continuity, and it has to be reliable.
So how do you make sure that it's reliable then?
A lot of redundancy and a lot of focus and a lot of making sure we do exactly what customers expect, whether it's backups, redundancy, and monitoring it continuously. It's very important for us.
Now, you are growing very, very substantially. What, you have 800 people in San Francisco, and how many thousand around the world?
6,000 global employees doing a great job for our customers every day.
Well, love to hear it, and I hope they are. How fast are you adding customers, and what's your pitch versus another identity security company?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective we have, and there's different perspectives on. Some vendors want to sell you everything across the entire application and platform stack. Some vendors want to sell you everything across cybersecurity. We focus on identity, and we focus on verifying who the people are in your company, who the people are coming to your website as customers or prospects. And now, really, with AI agents, we make sure that that identity service is continuous across everything you're trying to automate in your business with AI, too. And that's our focus. And beyond that, we focus on connecting to everything else in the technology stack and letting our customers choose what they want to use.
What is the scale of AI agents Okta expects in the next 12 months?
It's starting out very strong, but it's going to be growing significantly. When you think about what companies can automate with these AI agents, how they can improve their top-line revenue, how they can cut costs, how they can be more efficient, how they can serve their customers better, it's got tremendous potential.
What about your exposure to ChatGPT user growth? How much of that do you have, and how is it changing how you do business?
Well, I think ChatGPT is the perfect example of how much can be automated with AI. And when every company looks at that, they think, hey, we can make our customer experience better with adding ChatGPT-like capabilities. We can make our employees more productive. So it's really driving them to deploy more AI technology. And that means more identity is required. Those connections have to be secure. Those connections have to be reliable. So it's really an exciting time for the industry.
The CEO of Okta, Todd McKinnon, speaking to Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn. Now, some other stories making the news this Tuesday. We're going to be watching BNP Paribas at the Open after a court ruling linked it to human rights abuses in Sudan. A jury in New York found the bank was liable for its role in enabling genocide in Sudan under former President Omar al-Bashir. The stock closed down almost 8% yesterday on speculation that it will have to pay billions to settle related cases. And NASA says it's seeking competition to SpaceX for the contract to put astronauts on the moon, citing delays with the Starship spacecraft. The acting head of the space agency told Fox News he wants a space race between American companies to see who can get back to the moon first, with the aim of beating China. Coming up, the US signs a deal with Australia to boost America's access to rare earth minerals. More details on that coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good Tuesday morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Asian stocks hitting a new record, extending a global rally, buoyed by strong Wall Street earnings and hopes of a US-China trade deal. Australian rare earth stocks surge, meanwhile, on the back of a critical minerals deal with the US. Plus, history made. Japan's lower and upper house now voting for Sanae Takaichi to be its first ever female prime minister. Let's get to the markets then, and we do see that rally continuing. European futures, a little softer, a little looking for direction, it seems, after the gains of 1% yesterday, led by tech and defence stocks in Europe, and gains of 1% for the S&P 500 as well. The best two-day rally since June. You also saw the Nasdaq 100 closing up by around 1.3%. Today it seems looking for the next catalyst. Yes, US, China, the mood music on that is a positive factor. Earnings as well coming through with strength. FTSE 100 futures pointing to gains of 20 points so far. S&P E-mini is currently flat. Nasdaq 100 futures also searching for direction after the very solid day that came through yesterday. Apple was a key factor as well in terms of the upside for tech stocks. Let's split the board and have a look cross-asset. The 10-year yield back below 4%. We keep an eye, of course, on oil as well around the trade picture, but also supplies. If we can change the board, we can check in on oil prices. Brent trading at around $60 a barrel. Now at 61, just marginally higher in the session, but the softness year to date is there for oil. Euro dollar up 116, the 10-year at 397, and gold down 0.7% on the yellow metal at $4,326 per troy ounce. Now, President Trump has signed a landmark pact with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to boost America's access to rare earths and other critical minerals. It is part of US efforts to counter China's tight grip on the supply chains of key metals. Australian Treasurer Jim Chalmers spoke to Bloomberg a short while ago.
Prime Minister Albanese had an outstanding meeting with President Trump today. We're very, very pleased with how the meeting went, and the critical minerals framework is really one of the most important bits of progress that we saw in those discussions. And what that's all about is about helping to ensure Australia becomes a world leader in the export of rare earths and critical minerals. It's all about making sure that we strengthen our trade ties with the US, that we strengthen supply chains, and that we make sure that this remarkable opportunity that Australia has with rare earths and critical minerals is properly maximised.
OK, let's bring in Bloomberg's Paul Hunt in Melbourne. So, Paul, clearly there's a relief. There's optimism, isn't there, on the Australian side in terms of how this deal went, how the meeting went between the two leaders. What do we know that is actually in this minerals agreement and how significant it's going to be in reality?
So there are a lot of details that are unclear at the moment, but what we do know is that in the short term, in the next 6 months, the American and the Australian governments will each allocate $1 billion to rare earth and critical minerals projects. As you mentioned, this is aimed at shoring up domestic supply in the West of critical minerals that are dominated by China. China, in some instances, has a 99% monopoly stranglehold over some rare earths and critical minerals. So it's really a matter of, and these metals and minerals are used in everything from magnets in our phones, refrigerators, all the way to military applications and spaceships. You know, all of these really important minerals and materials that the US needs, that Australia has, have formed this partnership where several different projects will receive funding.
And there's also a conversation in terms of the defence ties between the two nations. You can almost hear the sigh of relief on the back of President Trump affirming his commitment to the AUKUS submarine deal. What did we hear from the two leaders on that front? Is this project now firmly going ahead?
It would seem so. Donald Trump has declared that it's full steam ahead for AUKUS. Its future was under question, under a cloud for some time. It's a very controversial deal here in Australia, and it's worth over Aussie $350 billion. So it's no small sum of money for a handful of nuclear-powered submarines. In addition to that, so yes, that is going ahead. In addition to that, there was also an additional $1.2 billion spent by Australia on underwater drones and a first tranche of Apache helicopters in a separate deal worth $2.6 billion as well. So yes, lots of good news for the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese as he visited Washington under the latest Trump administration, his first visit.
OK, Bloomberg's Paul Alahat, thank you very much indeed, joining us out of Melbourne on the details of that visit. Let's stay in the region right now because Japanese stocks have been rallying to new records as Sanae Takaichi is voted in to become the nation's first female Prime Minister. Bloomberg's Japan markets reporter Alice French is in Tokyo. Alice, talk us through the market reaction and how much is priced in and why are equity markets up on this news?
Hi, yes, as you mentioned, we've had a history-making afternoon here in Tokyo with Takaichi getting those votes she needs to become Prime Minister. And look, it's good news for equities, right? This is all off the back of the so-called Takaichi trade, which is essentially where investors buy into stocks and sell the yen and JGBs on hopes that Takaichi is going to push forward with her pro-stimulus policies. So she's spoken about she wants to put more government spending into things like defense, cybersecurity, tech, infrastructure, etc. So all of those sectors have really enjoyed that in recent days. We saw the Nikkei up at a new high yesterday, close to that 50,000 mark, which is quite something considering it only hit 40,000 last year. And yeah, there seem to be hopes that this rally could continue. It's all going to depend on sort of the pace at which she can implement these stimulus policies. We know that obviously her ruling LDP is still in a minority in the government. And so, you know, the extent to which she can actually do the things she says she wants to do is kind of still up for question. We know as well, of course, that we're just, you know, over a week away from a policy decision by the BOJ. Takaichi has in the past kind of been a slightly more easy monetary policy advocate. And so some worries that she may put some pressure on the BOJ there. And of course, I think this rally and its sustainability will depend quite heavily on what happens with that rate hike or not rate hike. But for the time being, yeah, the Takaichi trade seems to be alive and well. The extent to which we'll see sort of profit taking now that we're up at these record-breaking levels, I think is something to be watched, particularly in the AI and tech sector. But for the time being, investors seem pretty optimistic.
Alice French, excellent on the Takaichi trade, 49,402 right now on the Nikkei, as you say, watching for that 50,000 level and whether or not we can cross it in the days ahead. Thank you, Alice, for that update. The equity market reaction in Japan to the first female Prime Minister of that country. Now, President Trump has cast doubt, meanwhile, on Ukraine's ability to defeat Russian forces, backing off an earlier upbeat assessment as he looks to bring the war to an end. The US leader told reporters, quote, he didn't think they will win, just days after he met the Ukrainian president in Washington. At the same time, European leaders are increasing their support for Kyiv. At least that is the plan. Britain has said it will send troops to Ukraine once a ceasefire is agreed. And EU officials have said the world must pressure President Putin to negotiate.
Ukraine has been ready for unconditional ceasefire already since February. But Russia has no genuine interest in peace. We all support President Trump's efforts to end the war, but Putin will only negotiate seriously if he thinks he's losing. This week, we aim to adopt a major new sanctions package on Russia.
Bloomberg's Greg Sullivan joins us in Dubai now. So, Greg, the Europeans doubling down on their efforts to try and support Ukraine, as again, the support from President Trump looks to be wavering. He's really flipped on his views about Ukraine and to what extent it can sustain its defence in the face of this continuing attack by Russia.
Well, this does seem to be part of a pattern of President Trump's shifting comments on Ukraine's ability to defend itself. For much of his current term since he became president in January, he has largely held the Kremlin line or repeated Kremlin positions or seemed inclined to back Russian demands. And yet, just recently, following that last summit, we heard him really double down and say that Ukraine could potentially win this war. Of course, Zelensky met a few days ago, hoping to get a promise of Tomahawk missile sales, as well as ratcheting up pressure from Washington on Russia. But Putin was able to hold a phone call with him the day before, and Zelensky walked away empty-handed. We know that sanctions are on hold for now, while details about this potential upcoming summit. But again, Moscow has shown no indication it's willing to make significant concessions yet. It doesn't appear that the two sides are any closer to a ceasefire, and that's all amid this talk of the next summit between Putin and Trump. Of course, there are doubts as to when and how that will happen, especially with Moscow Moscow seeming unwilling to make concessions. The two foreign ministers from Moscow and Washington recently spoke, but it appears that Moscow is still holding to those maximalist demands, raising questions about when the summit will happen and Trump's commitment to supporting Ukraine going forward.
OK, Bloomberg's Greg Sullivan, thank you very much for that update. Meanwhile, China's property sector might be in for more pain, with international investors looking to offset their holdings at steep losses. They've invested some $140 billion into Chinese commercial real estate over the last 15 years. But a glut is causing rents to fall and many property values to slide. Let's get more on today's Bloomberg Big Take then with our reporter Trista Law in Hong Kong. Trista, how bad is the commercial real estate slump in China right now?
Thanks, Tom. So we know that the Chinese property crisis has been well documented, but what is slightly unknown is that the slump in the commercial real estate side. So as you mentioned, global investors have pumped $140 billion in those property, ranging from shopping malls to warehouse and to offices. But right now, those global investors are actually facing a dilemma whether they could hold on to those assets for longer, or they need to realize those losses and try to move on. And it also caught some banks behind those as well, because we know that some of the assets are actually the collateral of those loans behind. And when we see the value of those assets declining, so it's actually also impacting those banks as well.
Trista, walk us through what are some of the worst hit sectors then as this slump continues.
Yeah, of course, the office sector is definitely hit worse. We have had the global office market slump in the wake of the pandemic and because of the work from home trend. But surprising to know that the office vacancy are actually among the highest in the world in China. And even in some big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen, we also see the market, the office vacancy are more than 20%. So it would take us years to go through it, and we definitely see more distressed sales in this sector in particular.
OK, Bloomberg's Trista Law, thank you very much indeed with the update from that Bloomberg Big Take. Really worthy of your time on Bloomberg.com and on the terminal with some of the big-name international investors as well. Their exposure to that commercial real estate slump in China that, as Trista says, is continuing. Coming up, we're going to speak to GP Bullhound's Jade Williams about the state of European tech. We're going to switch focus. That conversation is coming up next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, a push to reduce reliance on the US military is fueling the biggest wave of European defence spending since the Cold War and is driving a new generation of startups. Here's a look at the 8 most dynamic defence startups Bloomberg says to watch in the region. Helsing raising €600 million back in June. It's the biggest round for a European defence startup ever. That's on the list. Quantum Systems is also there. Military drones. ICEYE, which is a synthetic aperture satellites maker and startup. And Tekova, which is a surveillance drone company. So just a couple of names in terms of the European defence space that you should be watching. As you can see, many of the largest build drones, of course, and navigation software for unmanned vehicles. It's an emerging type of weapon that's proven indispensable, of course, in the war in Ukraine. Others like ICEYE Aerospace are trying to reach orbit, which could make the region less reliant on US satellite launches and Elon Musk. It's going to take some time now. We're going to be live from the Bloomberg Tech Summit in London today, by the way, where we're examining Europe's pursuit of tech sovereignty. For more on this and what's happening in the European tech ecosystem, I'm very pleased to say we can bring in Jade Williams, Senior Manager of Business Development at GP Bullhound, which works with a lot of the European tech ecosystem in various ways. Jade, thanks for coming in. You had your All-Stars, your annual All-Stars event last week where you spotlight some really key names in terms of up-and-coming startups, but venture capital as well, the ecosystem. You got your finger on the pulse. What is happening in the European tech ecosystem? How much optimism is there? What are the key trends that you're watching?
Yeah, hi Tom. Thank you for having me. GP Bullhound's All Stars has been recognising tech winners for 23 years now, and GP Bullhound set up All Stars to really inspire entrepreneurs to build these not just national leaders, but real global category-defining leaders. So not the $100 million companies, but the $100 billion companies like Revolut, like Spotify. And each year, the shortlist is a lens into what's working across the European tech ecosystem. And this year, we saw sheer resilience, but outperformance from these star names from across the world, across Europe. So I would say on the fund side, some of the highlights from this year's shortlist is our shortlisted funds, which are spread across VC, growth and buyout, raised a combined value of over 30 billion euros in the year to invest, which is really positive given it's been a slightly trickier fundraising environment. And then in addition to that, they also delivered over 20 billion euros back to their investors. So one of the concerns lately in private capital markets has been, is enough capital going back to investors? So here with this cohort, we can really see that strong managers are able to return capital back to their investors. And that's really promising for Europe.
OK, so $30 billion raised, 20 billion returned to investors, because as you say, the timelines around exits and a essentially frozen IPO market up until recently has caused concerns about these VCs actually returning capital to their investors. That dynamic is starting to change then.
Yes, exactly. So we saw quite a few healthy exits actually across the shortlist with companies like FutureSpace and Egress, Revolut secondaries, and of course the Klarna IPO.
On IPOs, what is your sense, you and the team at GP Bullhound, as to whether or not there is now a healthy IPO pipeline, or is Klarna a bit of a one-off, or is it a catalyst? What are you seeing when it comes to IPOs?
No, I think Klarna's IPO has showed that stock exchanges are open for European technology companies. But, it's important to remember that this is, there's a real sense that Europe is entering a new phase of confidence and scale to be a contender to the US. And, Europe's got the strongest pipeline of technology startups than ever before. So whilst we might be, multiple life cycles behind the US, we're actually growing. Europe's growing 5 times faster than the US. So it's a really exciting time. And I'll be very interested from a UK perspective to see what happens from this Sterling 20 initiative that's just been announced from the Chancellor.
So that's the Chancellor. And we had the Mansion House reforms as well. And the Chancellor's been trying to get more pension capital, essentially, into riskier and growth parts of the economy. And some of that will end up in tech. Are you and the team starting to see the impact of that? Or is that more of a 2026, 2027 story?
I think there are still significant funding gaps around the growth stage. There's still work to be done to get the capital out of the pension pots into European VCs and technology companies. But I do believe this is a really good time, and we'll see how the Sterling 20 pans out over the next coming months.
And you talked about generational and scalable companies. What are some of the are there shared characteristics amongst some of those startups that you're seeing that have that resilience, that are really building momentum, that can actually be generational and global leading companies in the likes of kind of a Revolut or a Klarna?
Yes, absolutely. And on the All-Stars shortlist, we saw some great names coming through that were presenting at the All-Stars Challenge. So a few examples, and they came across a wide variety of sectors. So we had Elliptic as an example, who are powering the compliant backbones of the digital asset economy. We also saw Prolific, who are revolutionizing the human data and research aspect of AI, and also on the consumer side, so Tractive, for example, they're a pet tracking app scaling incredibly quickly.
Did you say a pet tracking?
Pet tracking. So not only do they track your pets, but they also track its health vitals. So think Whoop, but for cats and dogs. They're scaling incredibly quickly, and they have customers in over 175 countries.
Wow. So it's not a fad?
No, it's not a fad. So it's really exciting to see those names coming through. What do they all have in common? Why are they winners? What sets them apart? I would say strong unit economics. They're defensible. The ambition level is unquestionably global. And, we're seeing this real winner-takes-all mentality at the moment. And, 200 billion was invested into VC, and more than half of that went into 10 companies alone. So that winner-takes-all mentality, we've never seen anything like it before, and we're really seeing that coming through now with these All-Stars finalists.
Biggest challenge right now for European tech?
Growth funding, I would say.
Still.
And hopefully that will change, yeah.
OK, so still that reliance on growth funding. Jade Williams, fantastic breakdown of what you and the team at GP Bullhound are seeing in this European tech ecosystem and some of the catalysts that are coming through. Jade Williams, Senior Manager of Business Development at GP Bullhound. And we're going to have lots more on tech, of course, and tech investment and the future of Europe's sovereignty in that field at the Bloomberg Tech Summit in London. We're going to be live from the event today. Among the industry leaders, we'll be hearing from executives from Pigment, CoreWeave, Helsing, Panda Robots and Upwind. Plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. What to make of the everything rally? Look at the moves that we've seen year to date in terms of the S&P 500, up about 15% year to date. And yet gold has, of course, rallied as well. And that's the move in gold, the yellow metal up 65% year to date. And at the same time, a move into US 10-year debt with yields down about 80 basis points since January. You're below 4% today. The everything rally causing some consternation. The earnings story so far justifying the gains that have come through for the stock market. Has gold run a little bit too far? And how much below 4% can the 10-year get? Let's flip the board and have a look to one of the catalysts, at least in the session yesterday, which was Apple popping around 4% on the back of an upgrade from Loop, and also some data suggesting that the iPhone 17 is selling at a clip, certainly trumping what we saw in terms of the iPhone 16, and that is coming through for both the crucial Chinese market and the US market as well. And here are some of the names that feed into the Apple story in terms of the suppliers, particularly in the Asian session, performing very well in the session on the back of that story. Dan Ives saying that we now watch for the grand strategy around AI from Apple. But the iPhone 17 is selling well, and that is lifting those stocks. Let's flip the board and have a look at a different story when it comes to oil and the amount of oil that is on ships across the globe. About 1 billion barrels of oil currently on flotillas. This is the biggest flotilla that we've seen since 2020, according to number crunching from Bloomberg. Here's the number here, a little over 1 billion barrels, more than 1 billion barrels. And that is the biggest number that we've seen, the largest flotilla of oil on the oceans, the global oceans, since 2020, since that price war, of course, between the Russians and the Saudis in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And that continues to lead to pressure. Brent is down about 20% year to date. Now, stay with us because Bloomberg Tech Summit will be taking place in London. We're going to be live from the event. We're going to be hearing from executives, including Pigment, CoreWeave, Helsing, Panda Robots, however you pronounce that, and Upwind. Opening Traders up next. This is Bloomberg.